Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining. This event's being put on by AMBA and specifically the Mentorship Committee. The goal of the Mentorship Committee of AMBA is to provide guidance and wisdom to potential attorneys and attorneys who are guided by the principles of the Ahlul Bayt, and to sort of create a pipeline of attorneys. So, in addition to the program that we're hosting today, we also have a one-on-one mentoring program for young attorneys, and we do guidance for individuals who are interested in potentially going to law school. We provide them with guidance on their law school applications, LSAT, and kind of everything in between. So if you're interested in either of those, you can send an email to mentorship@ambalegal.org. With that said, my name is Asad Hassan. I am an attorney. I'm in my 6th year at Fried Frank, which is a law firm. So I, quote unquote, have a very traditional, I guess you could say, career path, but I'm excited to be joined by, soon to be joined by 3, and right now joined by 2 amazing individuals who have, struck out sort of alternative career paths after law school. So really excited to hear about their paths and to get some wisdom from them. So with that being said, Amel, if you could please kind of let us know about yourself and what you do, we much appreciate it.
Yeah, so first, I just want to say how much respect I have for AMBA. I've been following your work from the very beginning, and you guys are killing it. And I'm so inspired by all the work, and I can't imagine in a few years where you guys will be if you're doing all this in such a short period of time. So thank you for putting in all the hard work to host events like these and to get AMBA off the ground. So basically, I'm a journalist, and my entry into the field was interesting. A lot of it was chance, but I also don't necessarily like taking risks if I haven't planned for them. I'm currently working as a producer. My last gig was at PBS. I worked on their 50th anniversary special, and I'm currently working with director Justin Mashouf on a documentary that we're both sort of collaborating on. I don't know if my name is Amel Ahmed, by the way, and I'm a graduate of Brooklyn Law School. And I can discuss more about my entry into the journalism field from law school later on, if that's when you want me to do that, or I can jump in now. I don't know.
Yeah, we can get into that later. Also, I went to Hajj with Justin, so cool connection there. So thank you for that, Amol, and we're excited to kind of dig deeper into your background as we go. Muhammad Ali, if you could introduce yourself.
Sure, yeah. My name is Mohammad Ali Naquvi. I actually serve as the founding vice president of the American Muslim Bar Association. And thank you, Asad, and the Mentorship Committee for inviting me to share my career path today, the not so traditional career path. I'll start by saying I think we're all connected to Justin, because I met Justin in Karbala for the first time ever after we were friends online for 10 years. So
Oh, wow.
Justin's spirit is with us. Alhamdulillah, he's a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so to get into what I do, I work in the medical writing field in the market access environment. And I know that probably doesn't make much sense to most people because it's sort of an obscure field. Not a lot of people know about it. But I'll explain really quickly, as simply as I can, just to kind of give an overlay of it. So, our agency, we're based in Manhattan, in the East Village. It's a very small group of people. We're 6 people, and we work solely in the area of market access, and sometimes that's referred to as managed care, which may seem a bit more familiar to people. And that's essentially a niche within pharmaceutical marketing. So typically, when you think of a pharmaceutical sales rep, you might imagine someone walking into a doctor's office to talk to them about a newly approved drug that they should consider prescribing to their patients, and why it's different, and perhaps why it's better than traditional drugs on the market. So market access is a little different than that, in that it's concerned not with marketing to doctors, but to health insurance companies, which we in the industry call payers. So the way I like to explain this to people is that imagine if you go to the pharmacy to pick up some medicine that a doctor prescribed for you or your loved one. You get to the window and the pharmacist says, sorry, ma'am, sorry, sir, this drug is not covered by your health plan. It's something many of us have experienced and can be very frustrating. So pharma companies realized a few decades ago that in order to create more access to their medications and obviously to increase their bottom line, what they would have to do is to actually convince health insurance companies to place their new drug on its formulary. So the word formulary is very important in our industry. And that's essentially the list of approved drugs for a health plan. And what you can do is, if you have a health plan, you go online and you look up the formulary for your health plan, and it'll give you the entire list of all the approved drugs. And it'll save you a lot of time at the doctor's office if you know what drugs your health plan already approves, because if your doctor says, hey, I think you should take this, you can say right away, you know what, I don't think my health plan covers that, or you can pull it up on your phone and just look it up very quickly. It saves a lot of headaches. So to make a long story short, what I do every day is write presentations, brochures, websites, apps, any materials that are used by pharmaceutical sales reps who call on health plans. And what we do is we make both clinical and economic arguments why a health plan should put our client's new drug on their formulary, because it works and it will save them money in the long run. For example, by avoiding expensive ER visits or hospitalizations, or minimize symptoms that are more expensive to treat. So this requires me to have a handle on medical knowledge in various therapeutic areas and understand clinical trials for new drugs. Every day I'm reading journal articles on cutting edge science in that particular disease state that our clients' drug addresses. And then I basically am charged with developing compelling and convincing content that will help bring you the medication you need. So as a bioethics guy, I like to think of market access as the better side of pharma, really, because what we're trying to do is, even though we live in this very capitalist environment, at least on this side, I feel that the marketing is going towards convincing health plans to create better access for people, for lay people and people in society who really need it. So it's fun, engaging, and keeps you on your toes intellectually, and it's fairly lucrative, which is a nice added benefit. So if anyone has any questions, I'd love to answer them.
Thank you, Mohammad Ali. I feel like I've been working with you on AMBA stuff for months, and I actually did not know what
I do.
what I do. So that was helpful. So Assalamu alaikum, Shaarik. Thank you for joining us. If you could just quickly introduce yourself and let everyone know what you do.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaarik Zafar. I work for Facebook. Joined the company about 2.5 years ago, following about almost 15 years in the federal government, where I worked on issues, the intersection of national security and civil rights. And prior to that, I was a private sector lawyer in Texas for about 3 years. I started off as a civil servant and then was a political appointee during the Obama administration.
Thank you, Shaarik. And I kind of want to dig into all of your backgrounds and how you sort of ended up where you were from law school. So Shaarik, I'll start with you. I guess it sounds like you did practice as an attorney for a few years. Going into law school, did you kind of have in your mind that you wanted to end up in policy work, or is that just something that happened organically?
Yeah, I went to college and law school at the University of Texas. Back when we used to play football. What we do now is not what I would call football, but in any event, well, let me start off. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for inviting me. Hope everybody's doing well. I thought the brass ring was to work for a big firm, and I knew I was going to go to law school because I was a liberal arts major and I generally was, enjoyed writing and speaking. I didn't really have a good sense of what the modern practice of law entailed, like the billable hour and what working for large firms were. So I started law school, and everybody wanted to work for a big firm, and so I worked for some big firms, and they wine you and dine you. I mean, in a sense, when they take you out, and you make a pretty good starting salary. And then, but the reality is, and there's nothing wrong with this, right? I mean, these firms have tremendous resources and get excellent training. But for the most part, the big law firms are on the defense side, and you represent clients and then the big businesses. And a lot of people, and I had, after my second year of law school, I had worked overseas in Kazakhstan for an international firm. And this idea of so-called international law appealed to me. But I quickly learned that international law is there are very few lawyers who actually get to practice true, public international law, which is either the UN or the Department of State. International arbitration is a very difficult field to break into, and really, international law, what people have, what they have in their mind, isn't really what the reality is. But I ended up working for a really small, one of the oldest firms in Texas. I was comparing a pretty small firm. It was a firm founded by some Jewish lawyers who couldn't get in because they were Jewish. They couldn't be hired by the big firm. And that thankfully has changed. But they had stayed small and they'd been around forever. And it turns out it was actually a great place to start my legal career, because a lot of my friends were just doing document review. I was going to court, taking depositions. I was just learning how to write. But I was never completely satisfied. And the notion of the billable hour, I never really could wrap my mind around it, because it just seemed that my interests and my client's interests weren't aligned, right? The firm would make more money the more hours I billed, right? But that would be a detriment to the client. And so you weren't really rewarded for efficiency, in my view. Now, and some would dispute that. So I got my first job. I was, this is what, 2003, 2004. And I don't have to go through the whole career. I'll pause here and answer questions. But the way I got my first job was kind of funny. There was a listserv. I don't know if you guys are young enough to remember listservs, but it was such an email list. And we used to call it Brodisc, Brothers Discussion. And then, of course, that wasn't very gender neutral, so we changed it to Mustisk, Muslim discussion. These are mostly UT grads. This is post 9/11. There's a lot going on. And I can't remember who did this. And I really wish I knew who sent this email, because I would like to thank whoever he or she is. But someone sent me a job on USA Jobs, a link. And it was after 9/11 for the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And they needed somebody with legal chops, but also who had cultural competency, language skills, who could help the Department of Justice help investigate, but also engage communities affected by 9/11 backlash crimes. So I got my job, literally, I had no connection to DC. I had actually put my name forward for just a regular DOJ position, because I always thought the idea of living in DC, was appealing. And I had secured an interview, but I applied online. And then a few weeks later, I got a call. I was having lunch with some partners, and they said, "Hey, look, this is Department of Justice. Are you interested?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm interested." And they're like, "Well, we'd love to interview you." I was like, "Great, I'm going to be in DC," because I had made arrangements to fly to DC for this other interview. And I was like, "Can we do it in a few weeks?" And like, "No, you don't understand. We'd like to interview you later this afternoon." And I'm like, "Okay." And so this is during the Bush years. This is for a civil servant position. I went back to my desk. I quickly Googled Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, figured out what they did, and they asked me a series of questions. Some of them probably inappropriate, because I think they were trying to figure out if I was a conservative or not, and I'm not. Like, if there was a particular judicial philosophy I had, or what Supreme Court justice I liked. I think the right answer was like Scalia or Thomas. I didn't. My response was, look, if you're asking about abortion. And they go, no. Sorry, because they're not allowed to do that. But I said, look, I remember what I told them. I go, look, I'm not super liberal. I'm definitely left of center. I'm probably more progressive now, but I'm not conservative. But my view is, like, you guys draw the box. I'll stay inside the box, and if I can't, I'll quit. And for whatever reason, they liked that. So I got later that week, maybe a month or so, the assistant attorney general was in town. He interviewed me and offered me the job halfway through. And and the thing is, in Texas, I was told by my friends that it's not like DC. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And they go, in DC, the shorter the title, the more important you are. You know, president, senator, you know, the longer your title means you're not that important. So on the first day I showed up and my business card read special counsel for post 9/11 national origin discrimination. You know, so you have a magnifying glass to read it. But in a sense, what that job was to investigate and help engage communities impacted by 9/11. Sometimes the victims looked like you or you know me, us. You know, sometimes the victim was Portuguese, right? So what we learned very early on was that ignorance combined with bigotry was a real challenge. Continues to be a challenge, sadly. And so that was the first job. And what I learned, and I'm going to pause here to let other people speak, is that the hardest job in government to get is your first job. Once you get your first job, like the world opens up for you. And, you know, I had a chance to work at the Department of Homeland Security, at the White House, the Department of State, and the intelligence community. And I can tell you a little bit, if there's an interest, more about that. But so that's a long answer to your question. No, I had no plans. It just kind of worked out, but I'm glad it did.
Thank you for that. That's a super interesting story. I don't know if I've ever heard of anyone interviewing same day and at least getting the job. Probably a million threads off of that I'd like to touch on, but before that, Amel, same question for you. I know I understand you worked at Al Jazeera kind of right after law school, I believe. So same question, when you went into law school, did you have in mind that you were kind of work in the field that you're working in now, or were you planning to do something else?
So I pretty much knew that I desired to be a journalist. I studied journalism in undergrad. It was my passion, but I graduated at a really bad time. Most of you are probably too young to remember. I think you guys were like 10 years old or something, but it was in 2008 and the economy completely tanked. So it wasn't a risk I was willing to take to just jump right into journalism without having some sort of security in my back pocket. And I knew if journalism didn't work out, I would want to be a lawyer, because ultimately my goal is to work in underserved communities, whether it's as a journalist or as a lawyer. So I enrolled in Brooklyn Law School, and I started my first year. I just focused on my studies like you're supposed to, but I always made sure I kept one foot in the door of journalism. And I had done some prior work in undergrad in the fields of like documentary work, and I did a lot of research for producers. So my second year of law school, when my peers were sort of getting clerkships and applying for associate positions, I started doing research for a press TV producer. So my first entry into big media, if that's what you want to call it, because I used to work for independent filmmakers in undergrad, but my first entry into major media was actually with Press TV, not with Al Jazeera. And I was doing a lot of research for a documentary that he wanted to do for the station while I was enrolled in law school. And it was just like part-time work. And around the same time, the Arab Spring broke out. And it was something that in my gut, I knew as a journalist, it would be the perfect opportunity for me to go and cover, because my background is Yemeni, and Yemen was also part of the Arab Spring. And the person I was working for was like, you need to go, you should go cover it for Press TV. But I also knew I had my law school obligations, and it wasn't something I was willing to just, I mean, it's a huge investment, as you guys know. So it's not something I'm just willing to just throw away for like a couple of months in Yemen. So I went and I talked to my dean about it, and I already had a pre-existing relationship with her. And I think that's key, like to build those sort of relationships with the administration. Even if you don't necessarily know if you want to be a lawyer, they can still turn out to be your greatest allies and give you great advice on other things. You know, you don't necessarily have to go in wanting to be a lawyer, but I think it's important that I already had this relationship with her. And she was a woman of color like me, and that helped because I was also the president of the Muslim Law Students Association, and we were constantly running into challenges with the administration with whatever event we planned. And one major event was surrounding Palestine and Israel, and that was a huge, like, it was very controversial on the campus that I went to. And she was very helpful, and I always found that she was a safe space that I could turn to. So long story short, I already had that pre-existing relationship with her, and I knew she was the right person to talk to about the situation. And I approached her and I said, look, I'd really like to go to Yemen to cover the Arab Spring for Press TV, but I'm not willing to do it if it's going to cost me my legal education. So is there a way that we can work around this? So she said she was willing to pitch the idea for me and to support me. And because of her, I was able to take the semester off and go to Yemen and cover the Arab Spring. And while I was there, I also started working for Al Jazeera. The other thing is I wasn't willing to go to Yemen if I didn't already have a contract in place with Press TV. You know, I wasn't just going to go aimlessly. So it was important for me to already have that contract in place. So I got to go to Yemen. I got to cover the Arab Spring. I was fully salaried, and I returned to law school and I just wrapped it up. And around the same time I finished law school, Al Jazeera America launched. So it was very convenient. And I had already done prior work in Yemen for them. So that helped. And I began working in their digital newsroom. And since then, I've basically been working in journalism. I will say that there have been periods where I haven't, journalism is a very finicky career, and you'll have periods where you're working and periods where you're not. And I have found that in periods where I haven't been able to secure a journalism gig, I have been able to fall back on my law degree. And I went to Istanbul for a few months, and I worked with an international legal organization over there that works with refugees. And the only reason that they would hire me as a fellow is because of my American law degree. And I started noticing that a lot of these international legal organizations, they actually prefer people with American law degrees as opposed to other countries or types of law degrees. So that helped me. So yeah, that was pretty much my road and my entry into the field. But I will say for me, I don't think if I didn't have the administration support and the dean support, I don't think I would have been able to go to Yemen. And in turn, I don't think those other opportunities would have opened doors for me. And even within the field of journalism, I have found that my law degree has helped me immensely in very concrete ways and not so obvious ways. It's made me a very sharp reporter. It's made me insightful, and I'm able to I can perceive the issues more easily, I think, than someone who sort of doesn't have that legal background. And then there are stories that I've noticed where if there are complicated legal issues involved, or if it's a matter of like social inequities, I can pull out certain legal issues, that might complicate the narrative, and that I can refer back to cases that I remember from law school that helped me, especially early on in my career. It really helped me write stories for Al Jazeera when I was working as a digital producer there. So yeah, that was my path.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thank you. Well, I definitely follow up on that. And you anticipated one of my questions, which was how your legal education helped. So I appreciate that. Mohammad Ali, I guess finishing with you, was your dream kind of to be a medical writing, to be in the medical writing field, or did you have other ideas before you went to law school?
Oh, I was definitely thinking about health law. I did a health law bioethics dual degree at Albany Law School and Albany Medical College, which is across the street from the law school. It was a very unique degree, the only one of its kind at the time in the country that had this health law and bioethics, combination. But I had sort of a similar experience to Shaarik that he mentioned, that, going to law school, writing legal briefs when I interned in a law firm, I'm like, this is so dry and difficult in terms of it wasn't interesting enough to me, because I was coming from, I was already a medical writer when I went into law school, lower level and a different audience. It wasn't market access or managed care. It was towards doctors, not health plans, which is kind of easier, but it's still very creative, and it's, you're reading stuff about science. I'm interested in science as well, which I found to be a lot more, really just more interesting than reading legal cases and precedents and trying to put them into this legal language. I just didn't like writing briefs, and I realized, and there's different practices of law, but I was in the healthcare field, right? So I wanted to stay in healthcare. And I graduated in 2010, just after the recession. Similar to what Amel was saying, that the job market was not good when I graduated. So I actually kind of fell back into medical writing at the time, which was a really good field even with a JD degree, because I was able to parlay that into managed care. Because so with managed care, there are some legal aspects that come in. What you can say to a health plan as a marketer, as a pharmaceutical company, is guided by the FDA Modernization Act, Section 114, so referred to as FDAMA 114. And it's very strict in terms of what you can and can't say, right? Because you're dealing with, clinical trial data that can literally lead to life or death for people, right? Depending on what medication they can take. So if if your representative of your company says something that goes beyond what actually is true about a drug or supportable, it can have major ramifications. There can be fines. There can be, and we're talking about, millions and millions and sometimes billions of dollars in fines if it's malicious, like we've seen with the opioid crisis, right? And specifically for health plans, typically a pharma sales rep, when he goes into a doctor's office to talk about a drug, he can't or she can't do that until the drug is approved, right? You can't go around, promoting a drug that's not approved, but it's actually different for health plans. You can start promoting the drug 6 months before its anticipatory approval. And the reason is because it takes time for a health plan to approve a drug because they have to go through all their process, right? And the FDA wants to make sure that those people who need the drug will have it on day one. And you can't have it unless your health plan approves it, right? So that's why there's that lead time. So for us, in our industry, we actually have a bit of an advantage that we're able to start calling on our customers 6 months before the FDA even approves the drug. So it's just a really interesting kind of advantage or benefit in our field. But so understanding FDEMA 114 is very important. And I actually was called on by one of my clients to write a presentation on FDEMA 114 because they knew I had a legal background, explaining it, what they can and can't say, examples of times when pharmaceutical companies were, dinged, fined by the FDA, other times where they kind of skirted the line and they were able to get away with or say something that was, promotional to a degree that was, more than you would think, or so just legally kind of navigating that language, that my legal background really helped me because that's something no other medical writer would be able to do, right? Another example where, my law background came in handy is we write appeals kits for doctors' offices. So if you are denied by your insurance company for a drug that you think you should be able to have, you can write an appeal letter and say, or your doctor can write it for you and say, this patient deserves this because of this and this and this specific condition and his background and his specific circumstances. And what that letter is called, it's a letter of medical necessity. And medical necessity is a legal term. And the legal definition of medical necessity differs from state to state. So we can't just write one letter, like a template for a doctor, and roll it out to the whole country. I literally had to go through the medical necessity statute in all 50 states, and we had to create customized letters for each state, depending on the legal statute and the definition of medical necessity in each state. And that was something that I could do because of my legal background, and because my company knew I could do that. That was something they had called on me to do. So those sort of things really, for me, it showed definitely a direct benefit of my legal education. Generally speaking, I think with when Obamacare was happening and the ACA was happening right after I had graduated from law school, that also created a lot of changes, a lot of ripple effects in my industry. And navigating that as a medical writer, I was able to bring that to my clients as well. And that's still happening, right? And will continually happen because of our healthcare system, which is incredibly complex.
Thank you for that. And I guess I meant to mention, if any of the participants, have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to cover them at the end. I guess the next thing I wanted to cover was a sort of a piece of advice that I heard actually a few times before I went to law school. And would really be curious what you guys think about it, which is that people told me, don't go to law school if you don't want to practice as an attorney. I don't know if you guys have kind of heard that either, like, don't just go to law school to kind of do something else, or like,
Right.
as something to add to your resume. Clearly, for all three of you, you have had incredibly successful careers that are not, following that advice necessarily. So I would be curious, to hear what you guys think of that. Do you think that's just, kind of like bad advice? Is it individual specific, what your views are. I'll open it up to either any of the three of you who want to touch on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's okay with Amel and. All right. All right.
Sorry, did you?
Yeah, I can go for such. Here's the thing. My view, and again, caveat everything I say because it's one person's view, is that most law schools, and what you learn in law school actually has very little to do with the actual practice of law. Much of, if you're working for a firm, for example, a lot of it's working with clients, taking, things that you don't do. Yeah, you can take a clinic class that'll teach you some things. Some law schools, there are a couple in Texas, focus, just on practice. But for the most part, there really is kind of a delta between what you learn in law school. And that's why the big firms, the reason I think the big firms only hire from a certain percentage, the top percentage, isn't because those people end up being the best lawyers. I think what law school is how well you do in law school is oftentimes, though not always, a function of how hard you work, and they want people who just grind and build 2,200 hours a year. So, why go to law school? I used to tell people, don't go to law school unless you want to practice at least for a couple of years. Here's why: because you have something to fall back on. Right, you can always have, you will at least practice for a couple of years. So if your amazing screenplay doesn't get bought, or or the great American novel doesn't get written, you'll be able to go back and do that. And I think generally that's pretty relatively sound advice for most folks. Generally. Also, law school is expensive. I think I'm the oldest person on the panel here. I graduated in 2000. I graduated undergrad in 97. So I think and it was a lot cheaper. It's really expensive now. It's also 3 years, and there's an opportunity cost, right? So if you know for a fact you don't want to go to law school, you don't want to be a lawyer, I would think really hard before signing up, to get a law degree. Here's some exceptions. In DC, I live in Northern Virginia, but I've spent the last 15 years in DC. Everybody has a law degree, right? I think our secretary, I think Tony Blinken does. I know Jake Sullivan does. Hillary Clinton did. Barack Obama did. And plenty of folks, to work on the Hill, right? Have law degree, and so it is a bit of a skeleton key. That said, most people who are in policy jobs did work as lawyers for at least a couple of years, right? And they did that to pay off loans, to get credentialed, and it's also a good experience. Now, this is not your question, but I do think the one thing that I would stress is, regardless of what you want to do, whether you want to go work in healthcare, certainly as a journalist, as a lawyer in policy, the most important thing you can do is develop your skill as a writer. Whenever I was hiring, people for my teams, even here at Facebook, even though our approach is a little bit more casual, learning how to writing effectively, that is the currency in which we operate, certainly in the policy world. And, and there's a lot, and I used to think I was, a great writer. And I had a partner very early on. He looked at a brief and just, and I thought, I kind of presented it to him voila. And he goes, okay, let's take a look at it. And then he just proceeded to cover it in ink. Right. And I was like, but then I went over and I learned. And so then I thought, okay. And so then I thought, you take a lot of pride in my writing. I got a lot better. So this is now the year 2013. And I'll tell you more about my experience in the White House if you're interested. But I'm at the White House. I'm working on a strategy, the national strategy for integrating religious leader engagement in our foreign policy. I don't know if any of you all know who Rashad Hussain is. Rashad's a dear friend of mine. And the idea behind the strategy was the world's a religious place, and our diplomats and our aid officials need to be able to engage religious actors. Even though we're a secular government, if we're trying to do aid, if we're trying to promote disaster prevention, vaccinations, women's health, oftentimes religious actors are relevant. But we had no national strategy. So I had this idea and we started developing it. And I kind of modeled it after Rashad, because Rashad, if you guys know him, he is a very religious guy who has religious credentials. And so he was able to meet with mullahs in Afghanistan, but there was only one Rashad, right? And we couldn't clone him. And so the idea was, how can we upskill our diplomats? So, we pulled the team together, we started writing a strategy. It was on version 50 or 60 or 70, and I was, this is my baby. When there's a change of leadership at the White House, and a guy comes in, and who's now the new deputy national security advisor, and I'm like, okay, look, this has been vetted, this has been done. Can you just sign off on it? And the guy, his assistant goes, well, he likes to read everything. And so this guy comes and proceeds to cover it in ink. Just covers it, my baby. All right, and I'm like, who the hell is this guy? By the way, this guy is now our Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, right? And so I'm like, yeah, this freaking guy. And I go, okay, yeah, that's a good point. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, he made it better. I mean, he made it significantly better, right? And his wife is a friend of mine. I told her that story when we were about the State Department. She told, but the bottom line is that that's like a journey. You can always get better as a writer, right? And you can always learn. And that's like the one thing that if there's one, it seems kind of very boring, but like things like, active voice. And I probably, you're a journalist and you probably write circles around me, but like, active voice, short pithy sentences, bottom line up front, things like that. These are things that, really are helpful that you look for, and they can help. And, so it's not all, how dynamic you are always, or how, so what your network is. It's really about, what a big writer, what a good writer you are. So sorry, long answer, but I feel really compelled to share that. Learn how to write.
That's super helpful, and something that I think everyone can always continue to improve on. Amel or Mohammad Ali, I don't know if you had a view on my question regarding the advice about sort of not going to law school beyond what Shaarik mentioned.
Amel, why don't you go first?
I mean, I knew if journalism didn't work out, I would want to be a lawyer. I knew I didn't want to do corporate law in any sense. So whatever type of law I did end up in, it would be something where I felt like I'd be working in underserved communities, whether it's in immigration law or criminal defense. Criminal defense, I actually found very appealing once I started taking the class. But it is a huge investment. So you do have to be smart in terms of how you strategize. So in my case, I learned to adapt with the journalism market. Unfortunately, print media is struggling right now, and you see media shifting to a digital space. And now you see and that's been happening for years now. And now you see the proliferation of all of these streaming services. And it's a great time if you're working in the area of documentaries, because all these opportunities are opening up, especially for documentarians of color. It's such a great time right now to be working in that field. So I think you just have to be smart. You have to learn how to adapt and move with the market. And I think you'll come to find that the investment is worth it, because not only are you doing something that you love, you're working in cutting edge areas within the media industry. So yeah, I mean, I would say that you definitely shouldn't be willing to take such an investment if it's not something that you're willing to do. But it was something that I could see myself doing. And I also made it work within the field that I was in, so that it wasn't a total loss. And it served me. The thing is, with the skills you learn in law school are invaluable, and they'll serve you well in whatever field you're in, regardless of whether you're a lawyer or whatever it is that you do, and particularly in journalism, where you need to have that sort of sharp news acumen and you need to be a great writer. So for me, it was a worthwhile investment. It doesn't matter if I'm not practicing law. So I think you just have to be smart about how you strategize and how you move within a particular industry, and I think you can make it work.
Yeah,
Thank you. Mohammad Ali, I don't know if you had something to add. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah, I agree with what both Shaarik and Amel said, honestly. my critique of law school is, and I think other people have shared this with me as well, is that law school doesn't actually need to be 3 years, and it really shouldn't. It should be 2 years, and the third year should be an apprenticeship in a law firm, in a legal environment where you're actually.
I totally agree. Sorry to interrupt, but I totally agree.
Yeah, it's, at that point, you should know what kind of law you want to practice. And if you're not doing a concentration, and I did a concentration, so fine, like I got to take health law classes all my third year and I loved it. But for people who are just doing a general law degree, that third year is just, it's a $50,000 worth of electives, which you're not going to probably use in your career. It doesn't really make any sense. And then also, law school is not learning to be a lawyer. It's the history of law. You're reading case law that happened sometimes hundreds of years ago. It's like, okay, it's great, like it's interesting, but how does this make me a lawyer? So you don't know that going in. You should be in clinic as much as you can. You should be, getting good internships where you can get practice as much as you can. If you don't want to be a lawyer, I wouldn't say go to law school, because it's a huge investment, like Amel said. I went to law school late, non-traditional. I started when I was 30 years old. So Shaarik, actually, you and I are about the same age, even though I graduated 10 years after. But
You look young.
I'm sorry?
You look younger.
Yeah, well, we'll see how long that lasts. Thanks. But yeah, so I had, I was an English major, so I'm going to get into this writing bit that they were talking about too. And I was a medical writer for a good, 5-6 years. And I always encourage people to do this, to not go directly from undergrad to graduate school. It's always good to get some sort of work experience. They say that for MBAs, like you have to do it, but I say that for all graduate degrees, like definitely do it, because your graduate degree should basically catapult you forward in the field that you've already figured out you want to be in. It
That's
should
very
be
accurate. Like, at
right?
least in my experience, I also didn't go straight to law school. I took time off, and I worked as both a paralegal within that time, and I was working within journalism work. So within that space I also figured out that journalism is ultimately what I want to do. But I also knew I wanted to go to law school as well, to sort of have that security in my back pocket. So yeah, sorry to interrupt, but that was also my experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I still feel like I have the JD in my back pocket if I, want to take the bar and start practicing law. It's like a pretty nice option to have, even though, taking the bar is sort of a huge undertaking, but it's an option that's there, right? And like Amel was saying too, I think having that legal knowledge helps you immensely in writing. And I think content development is something that will not get taken over by AI. Writing is something that will always be important. A human production, that will be always be very important. And you can see nowadays with the proliferation of social media and websites and apps that the content development is so sought after. I mean, I get 2 or 3 calls from recruiters every week. It's crazy. I don't even put my resume out there. It just happens to be on LinkedIn or somewhere, because writers are difficult to find. Right. So in terms of, really honing your writing skills, it'll never hurt you. It'll always help you. Like both Amel and Shaarik were saying. Yeah.
Thanks, Mohammad Ali. And actually, going on your point about, the third year being
moderate lawyers meeting.
Being an apprenticeship, I would suggest that you, I took a clinic my third year. It was like almost all my credits, representing a cooperative housing unit. And it was probably like one of the best experiences of my life. It was like crazy. There was like a coup between the low-income housing members and all sorts of crazy things, but it was like the best lesson probably I ever learned in client development, for one, and just kind of like what it takes to be a lawyer. So I would definitely suggest that to everyone. The next question I wanted to touch on, and Shaarik, you mentioned, you had your listserv, which I guess maybe was like was a prototype for Facebook. Maybe you were ahead of the curve. That's why you ended up where you are. But I wanted to talk about kind of the resources or the people that you leaned on, either in law school or at the beginning of your career, or throughout sort of the different steps in your career on either, you know, getting advice on what to do next, or sort of leading you to the next job opportunity?
Yeah, you know, I feel I believe very strongly in mentorship, and I've benefited personally, and I've been very privileged to have a number of mentors, and I encourage you, if you don't have one, get one. And that's kind of the reason you know, whenever someone asks me to do these types of panels, not that my story is particularly interesting, but I just feel like it's a way to pay it forward. In my view, there's at least two types of mentors. One is, you know, he or she is someone who's doing something that you would eventually like to do. Yeah. So let's say you want to, you know, you want to be an appellate lawyer, you say you want to do healthcare, or so, you know, and that is willing to sort of talk to you about what they do, how they got there, right? The second one, which is in many respects more important, is somebody, just by the nature of who they are, is able to open up doors for you because they're well connected, well, highly respected. I had this guy named RF Ali, who's still my mentor. He was an international arbitration lawyer in Texas. And, you know, I looked him up. I found his profile on his firm's website. And then just by happenstance, the Houston Bar Association had reached out to him and had connected us as in sort of this mentorship program. It was completely coincidental, you know. And so because I had reached out to him and he was like, you know, Walaikum Assalam, we should meet. And then, you know, we were actually paired together. And he, you know, he worked for a very big firm and was very well respected. But what he would do is he would just, you know, really push me and really, you know, challenge me. And, you know, and the fact that I actually put myself out there for the DOJ job was, you know, largely due to him. But that's not how I got my first job. I'll be very honest, you know, this is the legal market wasn't particularly good. I had worked for some big firms, but I was still in the law school. I was looking for the right fit and the right job. And so, you know, RF, my first mentor, you know, was a Pakistani American Muslim. I got connected to a guy, his name is John Beckwith. He was, you know, Texas blue blood royalty. His dad was a member of Congress. And I had an experience at one of my law firms I'd clerked where there was a little bit of, you know, some bigotry and some directed towards me. And it wasn't a good situation. And, you know, I kind of shared with him my story, and he just, you know, kind of took me under his wing, and we talked. And then he would just write letters. You know, I told, you know, he's like, I've gotten to know him, and, you know, and my first job I got because he wrote a letter to the lead lawyer. And, you know, when I was leaving to join DOJ, I was like, hey, listen, why did you hire me? You know, he goes, well, look, you went to a great law school, had good grades, but really it was John's letter, you know? And so what does that mean? That means that you have to, like, you know, people are willing, you know, people are busy, but people are willing to mentor. You know, I try to do my part. I have two little kids now. You know, I'm as busy as I've ever been, but I always try to make time if I can. And on Friday, I'm talking to 4 or 5 people who either want to get in government, or who are in government, want some advice, people who want to join Facebook. And I like it. I try to do it just because I feel like I've benefited from it. And, you know, and so I would say that, you know, try to, you know, at least have a couple of folks that you can, you know, you can lean on. And by the way, I still, you know, every winter when I go back to Houston and Texas to visit my folks, John and I have a session where we kind of sit down for an hour, we catch up, but we just kind of talk. And, you know, and the deal is, like, there's very little I can do for John or for RF, but the deal is I do it for that next generation. And then, you know, for the folks that I mentor, that's the same deal. That look, I don't need anything from you, but just, you know, your job is the next time you can help somebody, you better do it, right? And that's the deal. And I think, you know, and that's why I think this is part of that also. So I really want to thank the Muslim Bar Association for bringing us all together, because I think this is, you know, this is important. It's hard enough being a religious minority or an ethnic minority, or, you know, a person of color in this country, that, you know, you need to help each other out, and other communities do that, and the Muslim community should do it as well.
Thanks, I really appreciate that. I want to be mindful of the time. I know we had 1 hour for the event, so I think unless there's any questions from the from anyone in the chat. I just wanted to close if you know, if each of the panelists could give sort of, you know, their 1 minute advice to someone who's either in law school or thinking about law school, about what they, you know, what would your advice be to them? And I guess there's also a question from someone, if the panelists can share their email. So if you guys, you know, are okay with doing that, if you could just drop it in the chat, that'd be great. And then Mohammad Ali, I don't know if you have sort of your quick.
Sure.
bites of
Yeah.
wisdom.
And I know we started late, so I don't mind staying a few minutes if people have questions. But in terms of just 1 minute advice, if people are thinking about law school, if you're on the fence, I would say go for it, just because a law degree will never serve you wrong. In hindsight, I would say try very hard to go to your state law school, because it's very expensive otherwise. And unless you're going to the top 25, it's not worth it to go to a private law school in terms of the money, I think. But if you can get into your state school, a state law school, it's, you know, law school is law school, unless you're going to Harvard, Yale, or Columbia. Law school is law school, so get that degree. You know, one of the great benefits of having a law degree is, in the beginning, it's a little strange when you go out into the world and you start realizing you look at everything in a legal lens and you're like, this is a little strange. But, you know, it normalizes and it helps you from buying a house to, you know, signing any kind of contract. I'm the guy who actually reads the 30-page contracts that nobody reads, like in the things that you engage in. Like we just, you know, got solar panels, and it's a 30-page contract that nobody would ever read, but I read it and I had 15 highlights and questions for the guy. And he said, I've never gotten any of these questions before. It's like, yeah, well, that's what happens when you become a lawyer, right? Like you actually read things and you realize that people will change them if you understand what you're doing, right? And you actually read a real estate contract for your house and you realize that if you ask the right questions, you can make sure things are safer for you, right? And even in the activism work I do, it's very useful, right? My friends will tell me, how is it that you say these things or do these things? Because you know your rights better, right? It gives you a great deal of confidence being a minority. The Shaarik was pointing out too is, you know, as a Muslim in America, you need as many advantages as you can get. And having that legal knowledge, it's so incredibly empowering to just walk in this world with legal knowledge. And that's why I love to share it as much as I can with people in our community, so that they feel empowered as well.
Thank you for that. Amol, I don't know if you want to go next.
I guess if I had to give a brief bit of advice, it would be, I think it's actually a really good idea to take at least a year off or some time between undergrad and law school. This way you can sort of experiment and figure out what you want, dabble. So in my case, I did both journalism and I did a little bit of law, you know, figure out what your needs are, figure out what you like to do and what you can envision yourself doing in 10 years from now. So I think having that time is important, and I don't think you lose anything by having an extra year to do in law school when all your peers have graduated. So for me, I think that time is crucial. I know Ali mentioned it earlier, but to me, that's probably the strongest bit of advice that I can give, is to take that bit of time and figure out what you want and try to dip your feet in whatever it is that you're interested in at the time.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Shaarik.
Yeah, sorry, we had a parental emergency here. You know, I generally, you know, in these types of panels, I normally stress writing, I stress mentorship, and so and I do think I agree that the importance to, you know, if you can, I mean, take some time off in between law school and undergrad and law school. But I think many of you all probably already in law school, but I didn't, you know, and the benefit was you're 25 years old, you're a lawyer, but you know, you're competing against people who oftentimes are older or more experienced, like Muhammad Ali, you know, who, you know, and I think you realize, you know, how lucky you are to be back in school also. I guess the quick point that I'd say is that it is possible to change your career. It is possible to, if you're unhappy doing something, to sort of, to change. It sometimes takes risk. Sometimes, look, if you went to Harvard or Yale Law School, like you can do pretty much whatever you want. If you're like a state school kid like me, you have to hustle a little bit. It is possible. So if you find yourself doing something that you're not particularly happy about, you should try. It doesn't mean that I'm not trying to overly romanticize, working life. Work is hard, and and it's not always rewarding. I've really enjoyed my career, and I feel very fortunate. But every career has its ups and downs, and it is possible to change and do things. But I would also say, you do want to plan things out, right? But like, if I'm a state school kid born in Karachi. If someone told me that I would have worked, for President Obama in the White House, been an appointee at the State Department, things that I would never even dream of doing, right? And I didn't plan it out. It was just, by the grace of God and, by people who took a chance on me. And I'm sure there's people who are far more qualified, but I got the shot. And so I think, be available, be open to, and network and get to know people and talk and, spend time in civil society organizations. And the more people know you, the more people who are, who are familiar with you, that those are more opportunities for you to do something interesting or cool. And the one piece of advice that my mentor told me was, don't worry about the money. Don't worry about. He was trying to do something that's interesting, and I think that's advice that I think is, like, at the end, the money will come, all that stuff will come, but like, if you do stuff that's interesting, you're still willing to get up each day. And so, I feel like I've had a chance to do a lot of interesting stuff. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Shaarik, and thank you to all three of our panelists. Really appreciate your words of wisdom. I did want to make a small pitch. We put in information for donations for AMBA. If you've enjoyed this program and you're interested in other programs, and you're able, inshallah, if you could, donate, that would be very much appreciated. And if you're, if not financially, we'd love to see you continue to come to our events and to join us and to take part. And if you're an older attorney who can help with mentoring, we'd love to have you do that. Or if you're interested in helping with our advocacy statements, we also, we're working on policy efforts, things like that. So anything you're interested in, feel free to visit our website to get more information. I think with that, our event is over. We appreciate your time. I know, Mohammad Ali said he had some more time, so I don't know if some of the other panelists want to stick around. We can stop the recording if anyone has any questions, but if not, if panelists need to go or if participants need to go, feel free to go. Otherwise, we can stick around and if there's any questions in the chat.